Want to know what's happening on Xtreme today? Not much except bending, cutting, designing a 4-link, repairing bullet holes, installing a doubler, 20-inch beads, building custom exhaust, trick both sides, fender repair, applying filler, block sanding, mixing primer, and laying it down. Is that it?
Welcome to Xtreme 4x4, where today we're working on our S10 project, building what we like to call a high-end off-road show crawler.
This truck has undergone a huge transformation from an old, worn-out S10 that had seen better days to a fully tube-framed Truggy, but it wasn't as easy as it sounds. With the body lifted off the frame, the process of building a new custom tube frame started with some 2x3 rectangular tubing.
Once the new body mounts were built, the body was lowered onto its new frame, and the rest of the tube work could be completed.
To help keep the S10 looking like one, the sheet metal was gently massaged with some stretch in the front fenders and the bedsides narrowed.
Finally, the new heart for the beast was stuffed under the hood. A killer 502 Ramjet Big Block.
Now today we're going to be doing some body work, dealing with the rest of the drivetrain, getting some exhaust onto that big block, and hopefully firing it up. It all starts with this 4L80E transmission.
Now this is a custom unit built by the guys down at Boulder Transmission, and it's specifically spec'd for this vehicle, and it can handle up to 800 foot-pounds of torque. Now they do that by upgrading to a 5-planet rear carrier assembly using 300M hardened shafts, and as well as an updated boost valve that'll raise pressure for firmer shifts. Now the nice thing about this is not only did they paint the outside of our case, clear coat it, and airbrush our logo on it for that custom touch, they took care of this transmission on the inside specific for our project. They took down all the information about what we're building, from engine size, tire size, right down to final drive ratio, and made specific suggestions for our transmission, like a low stall speed lockup converter that'll lock up at around 1500 to 1600 RPM and allow us to take care of the low end grunt on the big block. Now one other thing they did is they prepped this transmission with engine braking in both first and second gear. Engine braking will help this truck when going down hills by using the compression of the engine to bring it to a stop.
Now, a high-end truck is going to need a high-end paint job, and even though the metal work has been started, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done before we can start throwing down some paint. For example, on this fender here, we're going to need to bring up this piece so we can meet up with this piece and then go ahead and fill in this gap. We can go ahead and fill in the antenna hole here, and same right here, but on this piece, we're going to do a relief cut, so it'll bring this metal down and maybe hammer stretch this right here so those can meet up. Over on this fender, there's 3 holes right here that I'm going to need to cut out and completely replace that with the flat panel. We're trying to get these panels as level as possible because you don't want any of the filler to be over a 1/16 of an inch. If you get thicker than that, it's going to have a tendency to crack. And for as much as this truck is probably going to be seeing those trees and the sides of cliffs, it's definitely important that we don't go thicker than required.
Now you probably recognize these 2 items on the bench from a transfer case show that we did not too long ago. This one right here started life as a new Process 205 out of an old Ford. Basically stripped it down and put all the guts into this new case that we got from JB Conversions along with their LoMax 3-to-1 kit. Now this will be going in our S10 behind a 203 range box that's been mounted onto an Off-Road Designs doubler kit. Now this box has been stripped down and all the gears are out of it, so I could go ahead, drill and tap the 6-bolt round mounting flange to match the back of our transmission, and while I cleaned it up, I just gave it a coat of paint. Now there's no gears in here right now, but since we're just mocking this up, it's no big deal.
Now you may be wondering why I'm both TIG welding and MIG welding on this panel. Well, I prefer to TIG weld because it's considered a softer metal, making it actually easier to manipulate. Whereas right here in this section, I had to MIG weld to fill a gap that I couldn't with a TIG weld. But what that does is leave a higher deposition, meaning I have to grind more, which puts more heat in the panel, making it more liable for it to actually warp, which is why I prefer to TIG over MIG.
Now with the triple stick shifters we got from Off-Road Designs bolted up to the back of the transmission, we have a bunch of different ranges to choose from. Everything from a 1-to-1 high range all the way down to a 6-to-1 with everything in low. Now we also have the ability to shift either axle independently of each other so we can do front and rear digs. Now with everything mounted and we know that it's in a good spot, we can go ahead and build the rest of the cross members as well as the skid plating for this drivetrain.
After the break, our female fabricator gets busy with fender repair, including how to fix some common bullet holes. Stay tuned.
Hey guys, welcome back to Xtreme 4x4. As you can see, I took a break from the metal work to put some filler onto this panel. But don't worry, I have a whole nother fender on the other side to play catch up with. And then all we have to do is make some mounts for them, and then it's off to the paint booth for some primer.
Now with our drivetrain in place and mounted, we can start to work on our exhaust. And since this truck is being built to not only work good off-road, but also look good while doing it, we're going to install a full stainless steel exhaust kit that we got from Magnaflow. Now this is a universal kit, and I got a couple of 2.5-inch straights and then some 3-inch elbows. Now the whole thing is polished, and the nice thing is it's never going to rust because it's stainless steel. The muffler is a fully welded design and also polished so it looks good. Plus, it is a flow-through design, so it is going to sound awesome behind our big block. At the engine, we'll start with a set of Hooker Super Competition block hugger headers. And of course, for this truck, chrome plating was a must. To eliminate issues with the front drive shaft, the 2.5-inch Magnaflow exhaust pipe will travel under the oil pan and then down the driver's side under the skid plate. Into a 2.5-inch to 3-inch Y pipe, then two 45-degree pipes will travel up behind the cab and into our muffler. Then the entire exhaust can be removed and fully TIG welded for that finished look.
Now pretty much all the metalwork and all the bodywork is done on the S10 Truggy except for this one fender. And right here in this area, we need to fix some bullet holes. Now a lot of guys will say, well, why don't I just come in and put in one big patch panel? Well, what that does is you create a giant heat area from your welding. Heat creates distortion, and that's the last thing that you need when you're doing bodywork. So what needs to be done is treat each hole individually. The pick end of the hammer will knock down the edges of the hole, but since it's split, I'll cut out the puckered area and the torn edges and weld in a filler piece. Now you can use this technique to shave door handles, side mirrors, or rust repair. Just be sure to take the time between the welds so the metal doesn't warp. Body mounts will hold our sheet metal to the tube structure underneath. On the rear, a few simple tabs will be welded to both the bedside and the top rail of the chassis. On the front, the hood needs to be in place for the fender location. And just like the rear, using some leftover exhaust tubing and some 3/16-inch plate, the ends of the panel can be held in place.
Now the term high-end crawler can mean a lot of different things. It can mean spending a lot of money on rare, hard-to-find drivetrain components, but it can also just mean labor, and a lot of it, spent on custom touches like bodywork, cage gussets, and wild tube work. But it can also mean just paying attention to the details, like turning an ordinary boat side into something pretty special. With our logo traced onto a piece of 3/16-inch steel, and a steady hand and some patience with the plasma cutter, A simple skid plate becomes a custom piece that'll look great on any high-end crawler. It'll be tacked in place for now and then fully welded when we tear this truck apart for paint, powder coat, and chrome.
Welcome back to Xtreme 4x4 in our S10 Truggy build.
So far today, we've installed the rest of the drivetrain, pulled the body panels off to do some body work, built a custom exhaust as well as some skid plates. And right now, it's time to install some axles in this truck. And you guessed it, Rockwell.
Now the last step in our body work before primer is to spread the plastic filler. That will produce a level surface that in the end will match the original contours of the panel. I'm prepping the area by removing the paint with 36 grit sandpaper. Filler is known to not completely adhere otherwise. Typically, more filler is applied than needed and allowed to set up. Excess is sanded down, leaving what's necessary to fill any low spots in the middle. The goal is not to go over 1/16 of an inch thick, but it's okay to go up to 1/4 of an inch if absolutely necessary.
Now obviously for this truck, we needed a pretty wild set of wheels. So we got these from Poison Spyder Customs. They're a 20-inch by 10-inch aluminum beadlock rim with some pretty unique technology specifically designed for trail riding. The inner bead retaining lip is actually machined with a sharp edge to help hold that inner bead in place. The outer rock ring itself is 3/4 of an inch thick and plus has extra material machined into it to make it stiffer. The outer clamping lip has striations cut into it to help hold the tire in place and keep it from spinning on the rim itself. Now the grade 8 nickel-plated Allen head bolts are actually recessed inside this ring to protect them when you're on the trail. Finding 20-inch beadlocks can be a challenge. Most wheel manufacturers stop at 18, but since this is our high-end Truggy, it's gotta be rolling on dubs. Now, not only does the valve stem come pre-installed for you, it's recessed really far back into the rim itself, so it's protected when you're out on the trail. Now let's head on over to the paint booth to Jesse and check on the weather.
It's cold and windy! Nah, just kidding. Go ahead and kill that fan. Now for a paint job that's as smooth as glass, the layers of primer underneath have to be just as smooth. We're using Clausen's Rust Defender Polyester Primer. It's basically a sprayable plastic filler that lays down a super high build to fill any little imperfections. It contains a built-in etch that allows it to stick to bare metal, fiberglass, old paint, and body filler, making it perfect for our hood and fenders. This is a very thick primer. We'll be using a spray gun with a 2.3 fluid tip so it won't clog.
Now with our axle tire and wheels sitting in the back of the truck, we can start to build a suspension for this beast. Now obviously that means we're going to have to be building a lot of custom brackets and tabs to get everything mounted in place. And that means a lot of equipment, and as you guys know at home, that equipment can cost money. Now there is a way to have a high-end crawler without having all that equipment in your shop. Ballistic Fabrication makes these great pre-cut and set up brackets specific for your axle application. Not only are they laser cut and keyed so when you weld them together they're perfectly lined up, but they also have little custom features like their logo laser cut out of the side. Not only will this save you time, but it'll save you money because you don't need all this equipment to have a high-end bracket.
Now, if you're wondering why we're using tubing with no heim joints, it's because these are just mock-up joints that will be later replaced with some blingin' 7075 aluminum links from Summer Machine.
We'll be using a combination of ballistic fab brackets as well as ones that we make right here in Xtreme to hang both Rockwells off a double triangulated four-link front and rear.
After the break, starting a crate motor out of the box doesn't always go as planned. when Xtreme 4x4 continues.
Okay, the primer's dry and the fenders make the truck look totally different. What you think?
With the stretch in the front and the beds shortened and narrowed in the rear, this thing finally has the stance. It truly earns it the name Hardcore Truggy. Kind of looks like a, you know, maybe a little kid's RC car on performance enhancement drugs. Now, we've made a lot of headway on our S10 project, but there's one thing that we want to do, and I know you guys want to hear it too, and that is fire up our 502 and hear that thing run. Now for that, we're going to need some wiring and obviously some plumbing. Now to handle all the wiring in this truck, we're going to be using a Painless Performance Products off-road switch panel kit. Now we're not going to be using all of this kit, just certain pieces mounted up inside the stock dash. We'll use the circuit breakers and the toggle switch as well as the harness itself. That'll keep the wiring really simple and really clean. We won't even use this ignition switch because we're using the stock one that's mounted on the column to keep things neat. Now for the plumbing, we're going to be using Russell cloth braided -6 fuel hose. It's just a little bit easier to manipulate than the steel braided line, and since our fuel pump only runs at about 100 psi, it'll be able to handle that no problem. Now at the end of the hose, we're going to be using Russell's new black and silver AN fittings. Since we're going to be painting this truck green and pearl white, the whole blue-red thing just wasn't going to look right.
Now the Ramjet 502 truly is a crate motor that has everything necessary to make it run. The ECU is mounted underneath of the Ramjet intake, and the harness requires two 12-volt power sources, one for the ground and one for the switch, and it's ready to run.
Now with all the fuel lines hooked up and some gas in the fuel cell, it's time to hear this thing scream.
Now we're not fully wired, but the battery's hot wired, which will send us enough juice to get it running. Ready? Chris, ready? Everybody ready?
Wah, wah, wah. Seems to be a problem. Check that out.
Ready? Chris, ready?
Watch out, man. Wah, wah, wah. Looks to me like got loose ground somewhere.
So it should be enough to go ahead and start the engine. Chris, you want to do the honors?
Sure.
Just kidding. Ready?
Next time we'll do more stuff. See you later.